California, where officials have shut down a beach after kayakers reported
A 7-mile stretch of Southern California coastline will remain closed.
The sudden announcement that all beaches along the California coast had been shut down came with an intensity few could have imagined. A massive underwater crack, stretching miles beneath the Pacific, was detected by seismic monitors and confirmed by marine geologists, sending shockwaves through not just the scientific community, but also the millions who see the California coastline as a symbol of leisure, beauty, and freedom. The closure was immediate and sweeping. Authorities did not leave room for hesitation. Beaches that had been filled with surfers, tourists, and families the day before were suddenly off limits, with law enforcement and Coast Guard vessels patrolling the waters to ensure compliance. It was a moment of abrupt silence in a place usually defined by laughter, waves, and sunlight. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The discovery of such a geological anomaly is not unprecedented, but the sheer scale of this fissure and its position just off California's coast made it alarming. Underwater cracks, or faults, often hint at seismic instability. When such a formation opens up, especially one as large as this, the implications extend beyond simple tectonic shifts. The crack signaled that immense pressure had been building beneath the seabed. Scientists described it as the Earth's crust revealing its stress in a visible scar across the ocean floor. For California, long tied to the looming shadow of the San Andreas Fault and earthquake fears, this was more than just a scientific curiosity. It was a direct threat sitting beneath its most iconic landscapes. Officials had to act decisively. Closing every beach across the state was an unprecedented move, but the alternative, leaving people exposed to the potential dangers of coastal instability, was unthinkable. The coastline is a delicate place, where ocean currents, tides, and geological forces converge. A sudden shift in the underwater crack could trigger anything from tsunamis to coastal collapses, events that would endanger not only beachgoers but also entire coastal cities. This urgency was made clear in the swift evacuation of certain shoreline areas, with emergency vehicles broadcasting warnings and lifeguards abandoning their stations under orders to retreat. What once felt like a safe haven of natural beauty suddenly transformed into restricted territory under watchful eyes. The detection itself came after weeks of unusual seismic readings in the Pacific. Monitoring stations had picked up vibrations that did not correspond to typical tectonic activity. Instead of the sharper jolts of earthquakes, the data showed a low, persistent rumbling, almost like a hum rising from deep within the earth. Submersible drones were dispatched to investigate, and what they revealed stunned experts. A yawning crack stretched in jagged lines across the seabed, wider in some areas than a football field and plunging down into blackness. The imagery was sobering. This was not a minor fissure, but a vast fracture that suggested the Earth's crust was tearing apart in real time. The beaches of California are more than just stretches of sand. They are cultural institutions, economic lifelines, and ecological treasures. Their sudden closure rippled through every aspect of life in the state. The silence on the boardwalks, the empty parking lots by the surf, and the absence of footprints on the sand painted a surreal picture. For the countless small businesses built around tourism, surf shops, seafood restaurants, beach rentals, the closure meant uncertainty. Yet even as economic concerns loomed, the underlying sense of awe and dread about what had been discovered eclipsed all else. The ocean, usually viewed as a place of escape, now seemed like a veil concealing something vast and unstable. Scientists immediately convened emergency task forces to study the crack, flying in experts from across the country and the world. Theories began to circulate. Some suggested it could be linked to shifts along the infamous Ring of Fire, the volatile horseshoe-shaped zone of seismic and volcanic activity encircling the Pacific Ocean. Others speculated it was the result of pressures long suppressed by tectonic plates grinding against each other beneath California. Regardless of the exact cause, the implications of such a rupture were monumental. The crack could shift slowly and harmlessly, or it could trigger catastrophic events. With so much uncertainty, the government's decision to close the beaches seemed like the only rational choice. The psychological effect of this closure was as heavy as the physical one. Californians are deeply tied to their beaches. They are a part of the state's identity, woven into its films, music, and lifestyle. To have them abruptly cut off was to strip away something fundamental. The sight of fences and warning signs lining stretches of coastline that once welcomed millions carried an almost apocalyptic weight. Even those who lived inland felt the shift. It was not just about sand and waves. It was about the sense of stability and freedom that the coastline represented. Now that freedom was cordoned off under the shadow of an invisible threat, the marine ecosystem around the crack itself also became an urgent subject of study. Deep-sea fissures can release not only seismic energy, but also heat, minerals, and gases trapped beneath the crust. If methane or other gases were to escape rapidly, the consequences could ripple through ocean currents and marine life, disrupting fragile ecosystems. Already, researchers reported unusual movements among fish populations, with schools of deep-sea species appearing closer to shore than normal. Whales and dolphins, highly sensitive to shifts in underwater acoustics, were spotted in unfamiliar locations as if fleeing from a disturbance they could feel but humans could barely measure. The ocean, alive with subtle signals of change, seemed to be responding to the crack in ways not yet fully understood. As days passed with the beaches closed, speculation among the public only grew. Some imagined the fissure as a harbinger of a great earthquake, one that could finally fulfill the long-dreaded big one along California's fault lines. Others whispered about the possibility of tsunamis, fueled by the idea that the seabed could shift suddenly and displace massive amounts of water. Though officials cautioned against panic, the decision to close every beach reinforced the idea that the danger was not abstract. Something significant had happened, and it was unfolding in real time, just beneath the waves. Geologists emphasized the uniqueness of the situation. While California is no stranger to seismic activity, the detection of such a pronounced underwater crack so close to its shores was rare. Most tectonic activity of this scale occurs farther out at sea or deep underground where it remains unseen. Here, however, the crack was alarmingly near one of the world's most populated coastlines. The juxtaposition of natural wonder and looming threat was hard to ignore. For many, it was a reminder of humanity's fragility before the immense forces that shape the Earth. No amount of technology or coastal development could insulate a society from the raw power of shifting plates and opening fissures. The closure also raised urgent questions about preparedness. How ready was California to face not just an earthquake, but the secondary effects of a shifting seabed? Coastal infrastructure, from piers to seawalls, was never designed with such a scenario in mind. Emergency drills focused on tsunamis and tremors, but an ongoing unstable fissure represented a different kind of uncertainty. Authorities scrambled to reassure the public that contingency plans were in place, but behind closed doors, meetings grew tense. The crack was not following a predictable script, and that unpredictability was perhaps its most unsettling quality. As scientists mapped the fissure more closely, they realized its reach was immense. It extended parallel to parts of the coast, weaving unpredictably in some sections and widening in others. Its sheer scale meant it was not just a local anomaly but a regional concern. The potential for interconnected stresses along California's broader seismic system made it a ticking variable in an already delicate geological balance. For every calm day that passed with no incident, the sense of suspense deepened. Californians had grown used to living with the risk of earthquakes, but this was different. This was a visible scar, a mark of instability etched into the ocean floor and magnified by every headline. Communities along the coast adapted to the eerie quiet. Surfboards gathered dust, lifeguard chairs sat empty, and fishing boats adjusted routes to avoid restricted waters. Helicopters surveyed the coastline daily, and research vessels floated offshore, their decks crowded with equipment and experts scanning the deep. For the average Californian, the horizon looked the same. The waves still rolled in, and the sunset still painted the skies. Yet beneath that familiar beauty was a sense of hidden turmoil, a knowledge that something immense and unresolved was churning below. The shutdown of the beaches underscored the profound connection between people and nature, as well as the vulnerability of that relationship. California's coast has always been a stage where natural beauty meets human ambition, from sprawling cities rising beside cliffs to highways running along the water's edge. The underwater crack was a reminder that this relationship was never one of dominance but of balance, fragile and subject to forces beyond control. The fences and warning signs stood as symbols of that humility, physical barriers marking a line between human desire and natural necessity. This moment became not just a geological event, but a cultural one, reshaping the way Californians thought about their coast. Families who had visited the same beach for generations suddenly found themselves cut off from tradition. Tourists who had traveled thousands of miles to see the Pacific instead stood at barricades, gazing out at waters they could not touch. The sea, once a place of intimacy and connection, had become distant, a forbidden expanse marked by risk and uncertainty. It was as if the ocean itself had retreated, not physically but symbolically, into a realm beyond reach. The scale of the underwater crack made one thing undeniable. Humanity is still a witness to forces far older and greater than civilization itself. In California, a state that prides itself on progress, innovation, and cultural influence, the sudden closure of every beach due to an unseen fracture was a sobering reminder of that truth. The crack stretched like a silent warning beneath the waves, reshaping not just the land but the psyche of millions. It left people staring at the horizon differently, aware that what lay beneath was vast, mysterious, and not entirely within human grasp. The enormity of the discovery had not yet been fully processed when deeper layers of its significance began to unravel. California's coastline, often celebrated as an endless playground of sunlit horizons, now stood as the site of an unfolding geological drama. For decades, the Pacific had been regarded as a backdrop to human activity, something to surf, sail, or photograph. Now it commanded attention in a different way, as a restless frontier with mysteries stretching into uncharted depths. The massive underwater crack, more than just a fracture in stone, represented a fracture in perception. The state, the nation, and even the world began to see the ocean not as a passive landscape, but as an active and volatile force whose unseen movements could alter human destiny. In the days following the closure, scientists accelerated their explorations with an urgency bordering on desperation. Research submarines equipped with high-definition cameras, sonar mapping tools, and robotic arms were dispatched to probe the fissure in finer detail. The images returned revealed a chasm both beautiful and terrifying. Its jagged edges cut through the seabed like torn cloth, and plumes of silt drifted upward in the current, clouding the water in an eerie haze. There were sections where the crack glowed faintly, not from light in the usual sense, but from the heat escaping through mineral-rich vents. These hydrothermal anomalies suggested not only tectonic stress, but also a possibility of volcanic activity lurking within the region. For marine geologists, it was as though the ocean had opened a window into its secret workshop. The human imagination struggled to keep pace with the implications. For coastal residents, the crack became a source of fascination and dread, a silent presence beneath their daily lives. Children asked parents why they could not play in the sand, why police cars now lined familiar boardwalks, why helicopters circled above beaches that once seemed so free. Adults, though less likely to voice their fears aloud, carried an undercurrent of unease. It was one thing to accept the abstract possibility of earthquakes, a danger woven into California's very identity. It was another thing entirely to know that a vast wound had already opened just offshore, a living reminder that the Earth's crust was not stable but shifting under their feet. The decision to close the beaches was not just precautionary, it was symbolic. By drawing a line at the shoreline, authorities acknowledged the limits of human control. The fences, warning signs, and patrols created an unfamiliar reality, the coast as a place of exclusion. Even the sound of waves breaking carried a different resonance. They were no longer merely background music to leisure, but seemed like the restless breathing of something immense. People standing on cliffs or boardwalks found themselves staring out longer, searching for signs of disturbance, watching the surface of the sea with a wary attentiveness. The ocean had become a stage for an invisible actor whose movements could shift the fate of millions. Economically, the closures carved a hollow through coastal communities. Beach towns that had thrived on seasonal tourism now faced shuttered storefronts, unsold surfboards, and empty hotel rooms. But unlike crises that arise from human conflict or financial instability, there was no enemy to negotiate with, no policy to reverse the decision. Nature itself had drawn the boundary, and all human institutions could do was respond. Local governments scrambled to provide aid to businesses, but even those efforts seemed minor. compared to the scale of the disruption. The real currency at stake was not money, but trust. The trust that the coastline, despite its risks, was a place people could safely gather. With the discovery of the crack, that trust had been fractured as decisively as the seabed itself. Cultural reverberations soon followed. California's beaches are more than geographic spaces. They are symbols that permeate art, music, and collective memory. The shuttering of those beaches left filmmakers reconsidering projects, musicians rewriting lyrics, and storytellers grappling with metaphors of absence and fracture. The ocean, which had always represented freedom, was now associated with danger. Artists began producing work that captured the duality, the familiar waves juxtaposed against images of unseen rifts beneath them. Surfboards leaning against closed fences became a common photograph, a symbol of suspended identity. The imagery of closure resonated deeply because it marked the disruption not only of daily life, but of imagination itself. While cultural and economic ripples spread across the state, the scientific community bore the weight of deciphering the crack's mysteries. Seismologists pored over data with sleepless intensity, running models on supercomputers to simulate possible outcomes. Could the fissure stabilize, or would it expand? Was it connected to the San Andreas or other known fault systems, or did it represent an entirely separate geological threat? Each question opened another layer of uncertainty. The crack's scale made it nearly impossible to treat as a localized event. Its existence pointed to broader systemic stress across tectonic boundaries, suggesting that the Earth's crust in this region was under extraordinary strain. The ecological consequences became a growing concern as well. Cracks in the seabed are not merely geological, they are also biological events. The fissure altered patterns of temperature and chemical release in the surrounding waters, producing ripples in the food chain. Plankton populations, sensitive to subtle shifts, showed signs of displacement. Migratory species that relied on predictable currents encountered disorienting disruptions. Fishermen reported unusual catches, hauling up species rarely seen so close to shore. To marine biologists, the crack was not just an isolated rupture, but the beginning of a cascade of ecological adjustments, each potentially reshaping the balance of life along the Pacific coast. The crack also carried implications for infrastructure, particularly California's sprawling coastal developments. Bridges, piers, highways, and pipelines all faced new scrutiny. Even if the fissure never triggered a catastrophic event, the possibility of shifting pressures beneath the seabed created vulnerabilities. Engineers were forced to evaluate the resilience of coastal structures, many of which had been designed with earthquakes in mind, but not with the prolonged instability of a widening seabed fissure. Insurance companies, always cautious of risk, began reconsidering coverage for properties along the coast, adding another layer of anxiety for homeowners and developers. What had begun as a geological discovery quickly infiltrated the practical frameworks of society. As speculation about the crack spread worldwide, California found itself at the center of global attention. International news outlets covered the closure of its beaches as both a scientific development and a cultural shock. The Pacific coast had always drawn millions of visitors from across the globe, and its sudden inaccessibility underscored the universal vulnerability of coastal societies. Other nations with seismically active coastlines began to question their own preparedness, initiating reviews of their monitoring systems. The California fissure, though geographically local, became a global story, a reminder of the interconnectedness of natural risks across the planet. The psychological toll deepened with each passing day of closure. Beaches, once seen as spaces of openness and release, had become reminders of confinement. Californians found themselves confronting a paradox. The ocean, vast and eternal, now felt claustrophobic, its expanse narrowed by the knowledge of instability. The act of simply standing by the water's edge became charged with new meaning. Some found themselves drawn to the coast more than ever, compelled to bear witness to its shifting identity. Others avoided it altogether, unwilling to confront the unease it stirred. In both cases, the crack's presence reshaped the relationship between people and their environment. Technology played a crucial role in how the story unfolded. Satellite imagery captured shifts in the seafloor with startling clarity, while sonar mapping traced the crack's progression in near real time. Social media spread images of empty beaches, abandoned lifeguard towers, and patrol vehicles along the coast, amplifying the sense of collective experience. For many, the closure was not just a local restriction, but a shared event transmitted through screens. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on California beaches shutting down after underwater crack? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.